Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Sports Scene. I'm Julia Adams, and it's July 8th, and we're already still in a pretty much sportless world, unless you're still watching some marble racing like I am and started to enjoy. But thanks for joining us for Season 12, Episode 6. We have some exciting sports news and topics to discuss today, and I'm joined by my awesome colleagues here, Nick Kaufman, Reagan Griffin Jr., and Aiden Berg. Guys, we need some more female power up in here. How are you doing today?
I mean, I'm good. Just shocked Tyler's not on the show for the second week in a row. She seems like she's always here.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
so glad
I'll
you brought up
carry
marble
the weight
racing.
then. What'd you say?
I said I'm so glad you brought up marble racing. I'm such a big Rangers fan, so like that's my squad. I didn't think anyone else was into it.
Oh, great. Okay, well, happy I haven't been the only one who fallen in love with some marble racing over quarantine. But moving on to some sports news, guys. So Stanford University's athletic department came out with a big announcement today. Amidst the coronavirus pandemic, Stanford is discontinuing 11 of their varsity sports programs at the end of the 2020-2021 academic year. Some of these teams include men's volleyball, men's and women's fencing, which I didn't even know existed at the college
sick.
level.
That's so sick.
So sick, which is even more of a bummer. And then men's rowing and sailing I saw. So that includes 240 student athletes that make up those 11 programs, 22 coaches, and then also 20 supporting staff positions that are all going to be eliminated now because of this decision that was made by Stanford Athletics. So with that said, obviously Stanford is a Power 5 school. How do you guys think this will affect other athletic departments who may follow suit?
Well, I think for USC specifically, I don't think it's really going to affect SC that much because you look, Stanford had before this announcement 36 sports in their budget. USC only has 21. And I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm pretty sure USC has a lot more money invested in their sports programs. So I just think for USC, at least, there's not really much to be worried about just because there's already so much money invested into sports at SC, and there's so many fewer teams and everything going on here that I think there's really not much to worry about if you're a USC sports fan.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the one area that I would disagree with you on for that is men's volleyball. That is the one team that is shared in terms of sports among Stanford and USC. And so that's USC, the men's volleyball team, losing a rival in its division. And I think that could end up, displaying some issues for the men's volleyball team and for men's volleyball teams across the conference. But other than that, yeah, I definitely agree. I don't think that it's too worrisome for USC. As to your argument about there being more money invested in sports here, that could actually be, I think, a problem potentially, just because if they do lose money, potentially football season not happening, if they lose the money that comes in for these athletic programs and they need all of that money to put into these teams, then having that record of putting more money into teams is actually an issue if you don't have that type of revenue to put to these teams.
For men's volleyball, guys, I feel like they're always getting the short end of the stick here, but USC's men's volleyball program hasn't even been super successful. So I think on top of that, that probably also would be the first program to go if there has to be one.
I wouldn't want to see that. Yeah, I actually went to a men's volleyball practice right before COVID-19 hit, and we all had to get sent back home because I was doing some sort of story because one of their games got canceled with Harvard because of COVID-19. So just watching those dudes play, it's kind of besides the point, but it's a very fun sport. I'd hate to see that get affected at all. But this was clearly a case of Stanford as a athletic program just biting off way more than they can chew. To have that many sports to try to sustain that many sports is just unrealistic for a program like Stanford. And, I'm going to have to knock the school for not being better or having a better grasp of what they're actually capable of from a financial standpoint. But I'll give them the credit where it's due in terms of treating these student athletes that they've slighted to an extent. They're treating them the right way. They're allowing them to keep their scholarships. They're allowing them to keep them all the way through the rest of their academic career. And they're converting the clubs to club or the varsity sports to club sports so that they can have some sort of outlet and still get to play their sport, just not at the varsity level. So all things considered, this is probably the best thing that they can do, but you still got to knock Stanford for not being more conscious of what they could actually sustain as a program.
Well, adding to what you said, Reagan, with them treating the players right there, also treating the coaches really well too. They're letting the coaches go through to the end of their contracts, which I don't think a lot of schools would have done. I think most schools would have just cut their losses, fired the coaches on the spot. And they even said coaches whose contracts are expiring, they're still going to get a couple weeks of severance pay because the sports are being canceled.
I guess one of the main things that is to consider here is Stanford did this before college football was even announced to happen or not. So what do you guys think that's going to mean if college football doesn't happen? Because as we know, college football budget wise basically funds athletic programs. And so if they're making these cuts before even knowing if there's going to be a football season or not, what does that mean for other athletic programs at schools?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're going to see teams kind of do the same thing that Stanford did in terms of looking at which teams are going to be the best to cut. And it sounds horrible because there are so many athletes and coaches who are involved in these teams and have a significant amount riding on being a part of them. But there is some sort of, process that you have to do of, well, which teams bring in the least amount of money, which teams maybe cost a lot more in terms of equipment and other things than others. I think at USC, one I could potentially see is actually rowing, just because we know that team hasn't brought a lot of great PR for USC in the past. So I think that they would have to look at maybe just what sports kind of have that potential of taking away the least amount of good, and maybe even eliminating some of the bad things, as we've seen again with the public relations side of rowing.
Yeah, it's really worrying. I think, especially if football season doesn't occur, that's a huge problem for every university really in the country with a football program. And so I think a lot more is riding on this football season than people think. So I think it's really important, if these schools want to stay, at least in their athletic department, financially afloat without sacrificing these programs, they're going to have to really lean in on football and also lean in on their donors to try and negate some of the losses that will be taken this year. And like Aiden was saying, teams could be cut if football doesn't occur, and it's the sad reality we're in today. And so I'm really hoping football season is going to happen. But if Stanford's already cutting these teams without football having occurred, it's a worrying sign for even just the football season happening in the fall this year.
I think it's much more serious than you guys are even making it out to be, because I just feel like these athletic departments will completely burn to the ground if there is no football. And so if this is already happening, it's just going to show you that if money doesn't come in from the football season, I don't even know how athletics are going to survive on the college level in general. So I think that's why they're trying to make these, they're trying to be cautious right now, but I think it'll be more than just a couple teams cut if it has to get to that point. I think it could be a way larger scale than that. I don't even know if athletics could survive.
And that's a really sad reality to think about, right? Because even when we think about how so much is reliant upon a football season, right? But we really don't have the safety outlines and guidelines that we really need to feel comfortable putting these athletes in that situation on the field. At least from my vantage point, I don't feel like it's something that's safe at this point in time. So it's like, if so much is riding on the backs of these football players, right, who have to go out there in order for the universities to be able to sustain their athletic program, but you're putting their safety at risk, what does that say about the whole NCAA model in itself? It's something that's, we all know it to be ugly, and that's just another ugly side of it to me, is that the athletes are the ones, specifically the football athletes, are the guys who are ultimately going to have to suffer and be the ones to step up on behalf of these NCAA organizations and put their health at risk to make sure that there's other athletic programs.
And I think another side of, another part of the ugly side of it is the factors that end up going into which teams are brought back. I know USC, for example, established that women's lacrosse team a few years ago, and a big reason for it was to kind of contact a lot of those maybe potential donors on the East Coast who have a lot of money. And if that team is kind of responsible for bringing in not just a lot of athletic money, but for engaging an entire financial aspect of it, then that's a team that would be more likely to stick around, whereas other teams that don't have that type of influence, which really has nothing to do with the sport, those other teams might be put at more of a disadvantage. So things could definitely get pretty ugly about the decision for which teams actually end up getting to stay.
Julia, you're muted.
Excuse me, muted. I just was wondering how even this decision was made, like how Stanford went about being like, these are the teams we're going to eliminate versus not. Because, for example, we saw they eliminated men's volleyball, but not women's. So again, I know that has some Title IX implications and everything, but how is that? How are they going to weigh that team? Is it going to be like national championships? Is it going to be, they all don't bring in money besides football. So is it all just kind of like a free for all and the athletic department's decision?
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally hoping national championships count in weighing what teams to get rid of, because at least for USC, men's tennis, women's tennis, they have a bunch of national championships. But I think really it's worrying too, because at least personally for me, we all know I'm a huge tennis fan, and across the country, one of the first sports that are getting cut from every program, men's and women's, is tennis. So that really is worrying here as well, because it's being cut from so many different places. But I think it just applies to all sports really, that no one's safe right now, and it's really just kind of a wait and see what happens.
Yeah, it'll definitely be a a bummer for some of these athletic departments. And hopefully, I know they find a way to make football work so that we don't see these complete crash and burns happen. But moving on, as you guys, I definitely heard Kansas City Chiefs quarterback Pat Mahomes signed a huge contract earlier this week of $503 million in 10 years. So I actually wanted to break this down for you guys of a graphic I actually saw on ESPN. So this means that he's making 50.3 million in 1 year, 137,000 plus in 1 day, over 5,000 an hour, $96 a minute, and $1.60 every second. How just beyond is that? And seeing that graphic was just so mind blowing to me about making $96 a minute. I'm like, when I can't even make any right now.
That's the dream, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think everyone wants to be making Pat Mahomes money now.
Yeah, it's truly nuts. He's probably sitting, chilling, watching some Netflix some parts of his day and making that much money every hour. So, but with that said, do you guys think that the Chiefs can still put a Super Bowl caliber team around Mahomes when his extension kicks in?
Well, I think it's going to be very tough, and that's why I think that the Chiefs really need to prioritize winning as much as possible before this extension does like really kick in with the big amount of money. Just to get a little bit more into the details of this, he's touting for over $40 million against the cap, which is the most important part. Everybody looks at the overall amount of money, but what matters from a team building perspective is how much he counts against the cap. And for 8 years, he's often going to be over 50 plus too, and he's going to take up a fourth or a fifth of the Chiefs' entire team's salary in those seasons. And then that could also even get worse depending on the financial implications for NFL teams with the coronavirus. If they lose a lot of money from fans not being in attendance this year, then that money is more likely to come out of player salaries given the power of owners in the NFL. So he could take up even more of the cap depending on what the details are of how much his contract gets reduced as opposed to others. But I think it's just tough because he's in a really great situation right now, and that's part of the reason why they could be so good. Obviously, he is an insanely talented and one of the best quarterbacks ever already, but he is in a great situation, and if they don't have really great players to put around them, if they can't find the money to pay to put really great talent around him, then it's just tough because football is one of the ultimate team sports.
Help me out, Aiden. It sounds like you're looking at the contract right now. Is it front loaded or back loaded?
I'm not looking at the contract right now. It seems like it kind of like almost rises in the middle, if I remember correctly. There's 1 year in the middle where he hits like almost 60 million against the cap, which is just insane. And then it goes down a little bit from there. But it's actually a little bit kind of random, if I remember it correctly.
See, the thing why I disagree with you, Aiden, because over time, although that money increases and then it sounds like it fluctuates a little bit, but we have to remember that the cap's going to go up as well. And what I thought was going to end up happening with this Pat Mahomes contract is that it wasn't going to be an actual dollar amount, but rather tied to a percentage of the salary cap over time, so that he'd always be taking up, say, 15% of the team salary, no matter what the cap was. That didn't end up happening, and that's why I think the Chiefs, it might end up when we're looking at it 8-9 years down the line that he's getting underpaid relative to some of the other quarterbacks in the NFL, just because, and I see it from his vantage point because he's got a lot of guaranteed money up front. That's $500 million. I'm not sure anyone's going to turn that down, but I think that the Chiefs are going to be all right because they're projecting down the line the growth of the NFL, the success of the league in itself. The cap's going to increase, and along with that, that number that looks really grandeur right now, it's not going to look as big as it does 8-9 years down the line. So I don't think they'll have trouble keeping a good team around them at all.
Yeah, I'm completely agreeing with Reagan right here. The NFL salary cap has increased by about 10 million every year the last couple of years. So over time, I think as we get into the thick of the contract, that it's not going to be as big of a hit as it is maybe in the front side of it, just because the cap is going to continually increase. And also what the Chiefs have been really successful, and part of the reason they've been able to succeed recently is because they're able to draft and develop their players. So you look like Tyreek Hill, now Clyde Edwards-Helaire coming in from LSU. All these players are coming in. So now really the pressure almost, yes, there's pressure on Mahomes to live up to his contract, but now the pressure's on the coaches to get basically these bargain players to outplay their contract, to play higher than what their contract is worth. And so I think really this is going to show, not only is this sort of a vote of confidence for Pat Mahomes, but also in the coaching staff and saying, we're going to devote all this money to Pat Mahomes. Now it's on you guys to find the right talent and draft and develop, or like find a bargain free agent who's going to outplay their contract, who's going to succeed in Kansas City and be able to carry the team to multiple Super Bowls. And I think they have, I think Kansas City has what it takes, and they will be winning Super Bowls and one of the most dominant teams for the next 10 years.
So I'm a big proponent of you're only as good as your last game. And obviously with Pat Mahomes here right now, that's a very fair argument. You know, you expect him to get a contract or not of this level, but definitely of a greater level given his success last season. And I think, you know, it's easy to say that given that success, we could see a Super Bowl again if there's a season this season. But, you know, what if he stops performing up to their caliber in the next couple of years? What, you know, and they already have this contract extension in place, what type of, again, pressure does that put on the team and even Pat Mahomes to do with him if he's not performing like they want him to come a couple years from now?
I mean, I think that's the biggest issue that I see with this. You look across the league, there are so many teams that end up signing a quarterback or any player really to a huge contract like this. I mean, these previous contracts are way below the Mahomes level, but you see like the Packers with Aaron Rodgers, they signed him to a pretty big contract at some point, and they don't really have the ability to put a great team around him. I saw kind of the same thing with Matt Ryan after his MVP year. And those, I happen to believe that Mahomes is better than both of those guys, actually. So if anybody can do it, he can. But I think that we're maybe underselling how difficult it is to continue to build really great teams in the NFL year after year. The Chiefs do have a good draft record. Yes, they do have a good development record, but it's really hard to keep doing that year after year. Some teams have a few, very good seasons of it, but they can't really sustain it over time. And they're locked in, as long as Pat Mahomes is on the roster anyway, they're locked into this contract for the next decade. And there's not really any escape from having to pay a huge amount of money to this quarterback. And we've seen that really hurt the team building efforts of these franchises that have signed previous quarterbacks like that.
Well, that's the thing, is they are pretty much married to Pat Mahomes for the next, I think, 10, 12 years with him, because there is a no trade clause in the contract. But also what you need to look at, also, he's not just getting paid for what he can be in the future, he's also getting paid for what he's done in the past. And I think that's why Aaron Rodgers, why Matt Ryan, as you said, we're getting paid all that money. And I think that's also the issue why Dak Prescott is still dragging his feet on the deal, because Dak wants to get paid for what he thinks he's going to do. And the Cowboys are saying, we're taking into consideration what you've done, and you still really haven't won us a playoff game. You haven't done much in Dallas. So I think that's part of the reason why Mahomes' contract is so big. He's come in since day one. Even when he started week 15, week 16 a couple of years ago, he was electric for over 300 yards in the game in his first ever start. So he's shown that he has the talent to play in the NFL and be successful for the next couple of years. And also, like I said, it's them giving him money for what he's achieved winning Kansas City the Super Bowl. And I think if you told the Chiefs fan, hey, you're going to get 1 or 2 Super Bowls with this quarterback and a span of 10 years under this contract, I think 10 out of 10 times every fan would say, yes, let's do it.
And Reagan, I always love hearing your opinions on this. Do you think Pat Mahomes is good enough for this contract and will stay good enough for this contract during the extension?
I think Pat Mahomes he's one of the rare type of players in all of sports history where he essentially gets a blank check. And I, as a GM, gets to slide you put a dollar amount and that's what you get paid, man. Because obviously within reason, but he's just that type of transcendent caliber talent. I think Michael Jordan, I think LeBron James, I think I'm gonna try to throw y'all a baseball bone. Mike Trout, that's a guy, right? He's really good. There's certain players that come along that are just, you're worth whatever dollar amount you think you're worth, because he's just that transcendently talented. And that's the risk you take in signing a deal this long. But what you're doing when you're paying him that much money is saying, if I'm going to pay you this amount, it's because you're so good. I don't need as talented players around you. I think of a guy like Mecole Hardman. That's I think a sixth round pick. Dude looked like one of the best rookies in the league. And I have to think that's partially because of the dude throwing him the ball was Patrick Mahomes. If he's getting thrown the ball by, say, Marcus Mariota, it wouldn't have been the same product, right? So I think he's worth every penny he's getting. He's probably worth a little bit more than that, to be honest. I still would have been an advocate if I were his agent of saying I want to tie this to the percentage of salary cap, but I digress. I think he's worth every penny of that $503 million, and it's a match made in heaven, I guess. All credit.
Yeah,
to
don't
him.
get me wrong. I'm very much a proponent of the Chiefs signing this guy, because you can't have Patrick Mahomes, who wins an MVP basically his first year and then wins a Super Bowl and Super Bowl MVP his second year. You can't let that guy go, and you have to do whatever it is to bring him back. I just think it's unfortunate that it has such an impact on the team building efforts that they're going to have.
All right, great points, guys. Now we're going to move on from here, though. But one of the most fun debates, I think, always in sports is the Mount Rushmore debate. I was talking with our sports director, Sam, before this and asked him if I should explain what this is. But for those of you out there who didn't learn what Mount Rushmore is in second grade, I'm going to explain it. It's basically a sculpture in South Dakota with arguably the 4 greatest presidents in history. So we're going to take that and apply it to USC athletics and ask you guys who would be on the Mount Rushmore of USC sports. So let's start with you, Nick.
All right. I mean, I think this one you guys are all going to hate me for, but my first pick on the Mount Rushmore of USC athletes is going to be Steve Johnson. Aiden, I know you're not too happy about this one, but
is he in the George Washington spot? Because good Lord, man.
No, he's my first pick though, because you look at him, he is the most successful tennis player ever in college tennis history. He won 72 consecutive matches. He's won 4 team titles every year he played at USC. He won a team title. He won 2 individual titles. He's been an All-American 7 times. I mean, the list goes on and on. He's even in the pros. He has a bronze medal in the Olympics.
Okay, let's hear your
quarterfinals
others.
in their Grand Slam. Yeah. So anyway, moving on from Stevie, I'm going to go obviously Reggie Bush. How can you not have him on the list? And then you're going to add Anthony Munoz, who was probably one of the greatest offensive linemen of all time. And then finally, Allison Felix. She's won pretty much every track and field event in the Olympics on the biggest stage. So I don't think really that's up for debate.
I'll start off if no one else wants to argue this first. I think would Steve Johnson be in? Would he be in the Georgia? Is he the one in front?
You did say he was your first pick, and that's where.
Yeah, you know what? For me, Stevie Johnson's the first pick, but I'm biased towards tennis.
Oh boy.
Oh, really?
I don't know.
I'm going with that.
My qualifications for this, and I'll give my list in a second, but I looked at people that made a genuine influence on the university that I feel like is prolonged and had that kind of star power. And I just don't, to be completely honest, I think it should be like household names, because USC is in that caliber of their athletics. And I don't know who Steve Johnson is, but I know who he is now after coming to USC, but ask me that who he is, before I came, I just feel like he's not like a Roger Federer, and those are the type of athletes that I feel like USC does have. So I would argue
he's the Roger Federer of college tennis. So
all right.
He's not the Roger Federer of professional tennis, which also matters.
No one's the Roger Federer of professional tennis except for Roger.
There you go.
All right, Aiden, let's hear yours.
All right. Well, I'm all about greatness for my list. So you're not going to be catching me with some of the picks that Nick made, and I'm also going to try to bypass the kind of like glitz and glamour side of it, and try to give you guys some deep cuts that you might not expect to be on here. One name that you would expect to be on here and is going in my George Washington spot is Cheryl Miller. How can you not have her on here? She's the greatest women's basketball player of all time. And if you qualify as the greatest of all time in your sport, then you get the George Washington spot. I don't care. 2-time national champion, 2-time Honda Sports Award winner, which is given to the collegiate female athlete, or the best collegiate female athlete in each of the 12 sports. So she was just the best female athlete of the time period. The second one, which a lot of people are going to have never heard of before, his name is Louis Zamperini, and this is more of kind of a lifetime award kind of pick. He was a great athlete for sure. He set the national collegiate mile record despite having his shins cut by competitors who were trying to spike him during the race. So he great athlete for sure. And he also had a sweet sports nickname, the Torrance Tornado, which is always very important to your kind of legacy as an athlete. But then he also has this incredible story as a pilot in World War II who survived for almost 50 days at sea after crashing during a search mission, was taken prisoner by the Japanese Navy, and endured really horrible treatment during his time as a prisoner of war, but kind of like fought through all of it and really made something of his life afterwards. So he's one of the great Trojans of all time, not just athletes, but just Trojans in general. So he gets my second spot. And then I go with two USC running backs that you might not expect for the last two spots. Marcus Allen, who had one of the absolute best seasons in college football history in 1981, won the Heisman, set the USC single season record for rushing yards. And then he was also a member of the 1978 championship team, which is very important to me. And then the lead back on that 1978 team, Charles White, all-time leader in rush yards at USC by over 1,400 yards, which is pretty incredible considering some of the running backs that USC has had. 1979 Heisman winner, and then also a member of that 1978 national championship team. So going with greatness, going with winning, going with results. That's my Mount Rushmore at USC.
Hey man, you picked the two wrong running backs. I'll just leave it at that. Those are great running backs in their own right, but I'll be the one to say it. I'll go ahead and start on my list. I'll use that as a segue. Any list that doesn't start with Reggie Bush is immediately discounted in my book, man. You got to have Reggie Bush on your list, especially now that he's reassociated with the university. I could see if we were still in the era where there was that level of disassociation and infamy and all of that. But now that it's been reconciled and the university and Reggie Bush are back in cahoots, I guess, there's no list that can't start with Reggie Bush, man. And OJ Simpson, I said it, man. I know that that's a guy that has a level of infamy because of things that have happened in his post-Trojan career, but let's not forget the fact that while he was a USC Trojan, that dude was arguably the best running back in college football history by the time he left the field. That dude was an absolute monster, and it can't be forgot that he was beloved by his fellow Trojans while he was here. I think OJ Simpson's a Mount Rushmore guy. My next two are actually women's basketball players. You mentioned Cheryl Miller. I agree with you on that point for all the reasons you said. I also have Lisa Leslie. She's a remarkable player. She went on to have a remarkable career. I believe she's the all-time leader in rebounds. And I don't hold me to that, but I believe she's the all-time leader in rebounds for not just USC, but nationally. So between those two, I think those are two. All of my players are not just great Trojans, but great within their sport in general. All-time great players within their sport. So that's really where I'm looking at. I can see the point about Lou Zamperini. Not only is he a great Trojan, but a great American hero. But just from an athletic perspective, I'm not sure he was ascending to that level of greatness that I need to qualify to be on a Mount Rushmore. So for that reason, Lisa Leslie, Reggie Bush, OJ Simpson, and Cheryl Miller.
I love that. I mean, I share the Reggie Bush sentiment with you that he is by far my George Washington in both his just profound effect on the university. I mean, just the wave of everything that's coming with him being reinstated has just shown how much he really means to the university in general. And I know that he wasn't allowed to be acknowledged for those past 10 years, but even working in athletics and being there when he came in the fall to one of the home games, and we weren't allowed to, people, the university didn't acknowledge him yet at that point. You could just tell the sentiment of having him there. The crowd, everyone knew he was there regardless, and was so excited about it. Even people that worked at the university that have been tied to the university for years were all excited. And so he has that factor that I was looking for in my list, which were that dual kind of star power and that also talent and effect university. But I also have to go with Troy Polamalu, who I think is one of the greatest NFL players of all time, 2-time Super Bowl champ, 8 times Pro Bowl, just another one of those kind of super electric guys that people just love to watch, and as a safety, just everything like that. And even his effect after, I read earlier that he was on Moana, not like that he was in Moana, which is one of my favorite movies, but not like that, earns him a spot on the list, but I think just adds to his status in our community. And I also went with Louis Zamperini. I think just the war hero, Olympic runner story, the fact that a movie was made out of his life. He just has this, again, profound effect, also an incredible track star. And then I agree with you, Reagan, Lisa Leslie, one of my personal idols growing up, playing basketball. She had to be on my list. And I think she, Cheryl Miller was up there with that with me too. But I just think Lisa, her effect on the sports world and her effect on me just kind of made me give her that spot instead. But I do think we all have pretty good lists. So I do have to, I don't know about you, Nick, but
everyone's coming after the tennis pick. Guys,
no one else has OJ.
I don't know. I debated OJ.
There are other running backs to have on the list who didn't do what he did. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hey, man.
Can I defend not having Reggie on mine really quickly because he was my fifth. I just want to point that out.
Your fifth?
He would have been on the list, if I dropped someone. I was considering having him on there for sure because obviously, like you guys said, he's one of the great running backs of all time. However, I think when you look at Marcus Allen and Charles White, who are the guys who I picked, there's not really anything from a historical record that Reggie Bush has that they don't have. All of them have Heismans, and Marcus Allen and Charles White both are ahead of him in kind of the record books. And then Marcus Allen was by far a better professional player, which I think also does matter for how you view these guys in terms of their all-time legacy. So,
well, don't forget Reggie does have a Super Bowl.
Why I went with what was that?
Reggie does have a Super Bowl. Don't forget that.
He does have a Super Bowl, but I know Marcus Allen has one.
He does have one too.
He might have multiple. So that's why I went, especially with Marcus Allen, but also I just couldn't ignore the impact that Charles White had on the record books. But Reggie was very close to making my list. I don't want to discount Reggie because he is one of the all-timers.
See, I can understand the point that, they're all kind of on similar levels in terms of their accolades and achievements, but I don't know, man. There's something about just what you watched, right? And I think that's what really puts Reggie on my list, on everyone else's list. Is just when you see Reggie play, it's not like watching Marcus Allen or watching Charles White. There's a certain tangible, quality and electricity to watching Reggie Bush play football for USC that's just unforgettable. That's why he's arguably the greatest college running back of all time, right next to Barry Sanders, right? So I think for that reason, although there might be on equivalent levels in terms of how many yards they rushed for, how many touchdowns they had, or how many Heismans they received, there's just a certain electricity about Reggie Bush that was just unmatched by anyone else in USC history. To me, he's got to be on the list, man.
And it's also important to notice that this isn't only agreed upon by us, but I don't know if you guys saw that USC Athletics did their own poll with fans for football and posted on their account. And Reggie hit that number one slot. Well, I think Marcus Allen was maybe 4 or 5 on that list. So I think
how quickly they forget.
Rushmore here, he wouldn't even be on the football Mount Rushmore. It's arguable.
Well, I'm just saying, Stevie Johnson was snubbed on that list. He didn't even make the list. He was snubbed, if you ask me. I think he didn't make it on the story though, so he kind of made it.
It's relative, but Reggie Bush, can't argue with that. Well, moving on to our next topic. As you guys know, we love hot takes on this show. Usually we have Dan up in here giving us a good one, but instead we have Aiden today.
Who made me break out this? I got it ready. Aiden, read carefully.
Don't come after Cam Newton.
That same passion that Dan usually brings when you're going to tell us your hot take right now.
Yeah, not only Dan brings big shoes to fill, but we also have Reagan on the show, who's a noted hot take master. So I'm going to try to live up to that. My hot take today is the 10-year anniversary of the decision when LeBron James decided to go to Miami to join Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. My hot take is that LeBron James would have won more championships by this point in his career if he had gone to the Bulls during that time instead of going to the Heat. And here's why I say that. The Bulls had great young players, Derrick Rose, who won the MVP, by the way, the next season, Joakim Noah, who at that time was a future defensive player of the year, and Luol Deng, who was just kind of like a fill-in, do-everything type of guy who really kind of like rise to stardom at some point during that time. And they actually also did have cap space to sign someone in addition to LeBron. So if LeBron was dead set on playing with Dwayne Wade or maybe Chris Bosh there, he could have done that. And if they really kind of just like destroyed their team, basically, they could have brought Bosh, Wade, and LeBron on. But I don't think that would have been the best decision. Another big reason for why I think that the Bulls would have been a better destination is that Tom Thibodeau, genius coach, and I don't know if you can argue that he's better than Eric Spoelstra all time, but what Tom Thibodeau's biggest weakness was, which was kind of that hard-headedness, the need to play guys really like a ton of minutes that kind of came into play during playoff time. That would have been reined in by having someone as great and as influential as LeBron on his team. So he could just kind of focus on being the defensive mastermind that he is. And then also the Bulls always got a lot out of role players like Nate Robinson, Mike Dunleavy. And if you remember, towards the end of their run, there was a guy called Jimmy Butler coming up on that team. So you could have ended up adding him to that list. He could have filled in for Dwayne Wade when he started getting hurt and slowed down a lot towards the end of that run. And they would have had better role players than they had in Miami, which was always the big issue for the Heat. So in total, I think that Chicago actually would have been a better destination for LeBron. And especially I do think that he would have been able to stay there longer just because of the infrastructure that they had as compared to Miami, where he kind of looked around in 2014 and said, well, there's not really anybody here anymore. I'm going to go take off to Cleveland.
You know, Aiden, my innate urge is always to disagree with anything that comes out of your mouth. But I'm soul searching right now, and I can't find a reason that I'd want to disagree with you. I think I like your hot take, man. I think that Heat team as a whole within those 4 years, they really underperformed. 2 championships was kind of the bare minimum. I think they should have had at least 3, possibly 4. So to go somewhere else, I think would have been a better option in hindsight for LeBron James. Having a guy like Derrick Rose, and who knows what would have happened, right? We can talk about injuries and whatnot, but we don't know how that would have turned out. And the only place where I have a certain hangups is I'm not sure what the fit looks like between Rose, Wade, LeBron, and Joakim Noah. But at a certain point, just talent prevails, right? And when you have that many collectively talented basketball players on one unit, they're going to figure it out somehow. So I agree with you. I think they would have won more championships, and it would have been a hell of a lot more interesting to see LeBron James, literally, the guy that we all pegged to be chasing Jordan, right? Him go wear a Chicago Bulls jersey. That would have been really interesting, man.
Definitely.
I'm actually going to disagree with you, Aiden. I think that LeBron made the right choice going to Miami, and you look at it because that move really transcended basketball into what it is today. Because if he had gone to Chicago, yes, he said, you've got Joakim Noah and Derrick Rose and a bunch of young up-and-coming players, but this was still a young team. These weren't bona fide stars. In Miami, LeBron was playing with Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh. These were like some of the biggest names in all of basketball. He essentially created the super team or recreated the super team in the modern era of basketball. And so I think really that sort of gets taken away when you look, yes, if you look at just strict pure numbers, you could say that maybe the Miami Heat did underachieve by winning only 2 championships, but also you need to look at it from just basketball as a whole. It really was able to transcend the game and push it into the modern era, because if LeBron hadn't gone to Miami, who knows if KD would have gone to Golden State or Anthony Davis would be going to LA and LeBron would be in LA. So who knows what would be going on in basketball today if that hadn't happened.
I mean, I'm always for everything happens for a reason. I don't know. I think that I loved the big 3 when I was watching them growing up. I was such a big fan of Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, and obviously LeBron together. And I think it probably, obviously, everything is strategic. And I'm sure that he made the best move he thought at the time for him. And especially with the ability to have max contracts, I think that was probably much more fitting to give a Dwayne Wade, a LeBron James, and even a Chris Bosh just that opportunity to play together. That might not happen at the Bulls. So I don't know. I was a big fan. I think it also brought the Heat more into the spotlight, which was fun. I don't really like either when we just have the main teams always at the top and the Bulls as we know with their history. So I think it was fun seeing LeBron there, and his chemistry with Dwayne Wade is obviously very apparent. I just don't know if that would have been as possible at something like the Bulls, given the contracts and being able to have those 3 max contracts.
Well, here's the main thing that actually really excited me about it. Those injuries that Reagan kind of mentioned with Derrick Rose, I think that the first one, the one in the 2012 playoffs that really kind of set it all off, the ACL tear, if I remember correctly, was actually pretty fluky because he was playing. It was like in the last few seconds of a game that they had basically already won. And even if that does happen, the fact that you have LeBron and Wade on your team means that you can take a little bit longer to bring Derrick Rose back. And maybe he has a lot better health for the rest of his career. Maybe he was always going to be injury prone. But I think that there is definitely a certain degree to which resting him, having LeBron and maybe Wade or Bosh on your team, and having those guys who can kind of run the offense, as opposed to what happened in real life where Derrick Rose is kind of always responsible for running the entire offense in Chicago. And that put a really big strain on him. I think there's definitely a scenario where having those other stars on the team helps him to kind of stay healthier. And maybe we get to see more of MVP level Derrick Rose a lot longer into his career. He's doing very well now. He's actually had a great comeback, but still not kind of where he was during that MVP level that he had earlier in the decade. So I think that is the thing that would really excite me the most about this what if.
I don't know. It's an interesting hot take to consider. I mean, obviously it would have been fun to see LeBron there, but as I said, I just feel like the big three watching the Heat and everything is kind of was unparalleled. So in my opinion, I liked how things ended up. I know it's nice to reflect on that in the 10-year anniversary of where LeBron will go and, where he might go in the future and everything. People are always into debating that. But I think he ultimately always makes the right decision.
Well, we know where he is now.
We know where he is now.
Bringing
LA.
a championship to LA.
Hopefully, that's coming.
It's coming, Julia. It's coming for sure.
Maybe I should have made my hot take around how they're not going to win a championship. that would maybe brought some more disagreement in this group of all Lakers fans, and then me having to fight the good fight.
Damn, is that what you really think too?
I mean, Reagan actually had the hot take a few weeks back that the Lakers, Clippers, and Bucks were not going to win the championship. So I don't know if I'm as alone as I maybe thought on this one, but
so who's going to win the championship?
I got the Clippers at this point, honestly.
Lakers.
Miami Heat.
Miami Heat.
Miami Heat.
Bring it full circle here.
I'm going to laugh when they lose in the first round of the Sixers.
Oh my gosh.
Time can only
tell. Bringing it full circle, Reagan.
That's what I do.
Always keeping it fresh. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us for this episode of Sports Scene. Again, we do this every Wednesday at 1 p.m. And you could always follow along at Ann Media Sports in case you want to watch us again. So thank you guys. It's always fun debating some sports with you on Wednesdays. And we will see everyone back next week.